I arrived with a bottle of cheap wine and a foolish smile, naive enough to believe my 30th birthday would be a celebration. But when the kitchen door opened, the temperature dropped. This was not a party. It was a staged trial, and the jury was already crowded into the living room, staring at me in a silence that screamed guilty. My name is Katrina Northvale, and for the better part of a decade, I had convinced myself that turning 30 was the finish line. I believed that the turbulence of my 20s, the imposter syndrome, the bad haircuts, the frantic need to prove I existed, would simply evaporate the moment the clock struck midnight on my birthday. I thought 30 was the year I would finally become solid. I lived in Charlotte, a city that felt manageable, in a neighborhood that whispered of upward mobility without shouting about it. I had a mortgage, a retirement fund, and a distinct lack of drama. I told myself this was happiness. Happiness was not a burst of fireworks. It was a balanced ledger. I worked as a project manager at the Crown Spire Metrics Bureau. It was a sterile, glass-walled organization that specialized in data consulting and risk assessment. It was the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones about quarterly projections and liability mitigation. I loved it. I loved the cold, hard certainty of it. Just that afternoon, I had closed the file on a massive infrastructure analysis project I had been shepherding for 8 months. My boss, a man who regarded emotions as inefficiencies, had given me a singular nod of approval. That nod was enough. It was the currency I was used to dealing in. I walked out of the office feeling lighter than I had in years, the hum of the air conditioning still buzzing in my ears, confident that I had built a life that was impregnable. My marriage to Connor Whitfall was the cornerstone of that fortress. Connor was not a man of grand gestures. He did not write poetry, and he did not buy me extravagant jewelry for no reason. Connor was the man who noticed the kitchen faucet was dripping and spent his Saturday morning under the sink with a wrench, swearing softly until the silence returned. He was practical. He was a landscape architect who spent his days with soil and blueprints, grounding things, making sure roots took hold. When I came home that evening, the house smelled of lemon polish and the faint, earthy scent of peat moss that always clung to Connor's boots. He was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. He looked up and smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that slow, steady way that usually made my pulse settle. We were a good team. That is what everyone said. Catriona and Connor, the sensible couple, the ones who would pay off their house early, the ones who would never make a scene. I went to the bedroom to change. I swapped my structured blazer for a softer dress, something modest in navy blue. I wanted to look professional yet approachable. I wanted to look like the daughter my parents expected. My relationship with my mother and father was, for lack of a better word, stiff. It was structural rather than emotional. We were like colleagues who had been assigned to the same long-term project. They were not warm people. They did not hug. They did not use nicknames. But I told myself that was just their way. They were from a different generation, a different mindset. They showed love through expectations. If they expected a lot from me, it meant they believed I was capable of delivering it. That was the lie I had polished for 30 years until it shone like a diamond. I had bought a bottle of wine on the way home. It was a Cabernet. Decent but not expensive. The price tag hovering around $20. I had peeled the price sticker off carefully, making sure no residue remained. I had also written a card. It took me 10 minutes to write 3 sentences. Thank you for hosting. Looking forward to seeing you. Love, Catriona. I stared at the word love for a long time. It felt like a forgery. But I sealed the envelope anyway. I was playing the role of the good daughter. I was excellent at this role. I knew exactly where to stand, when to smile, and how to deflect their subtle criticisms with a self-deprecating laugh. Then came the vibration of my phone on the vanity table. It was a text from my mother. Please arrive at 6 sharp. Do not be late. And Katrina, come alone. We need to speak with you before the others arrive. I frowned, staring at the screen. The message was odd. My mother was precise, yes, but she was rarely urgent, and the instruction to come alone was jarring. Connor and I were a unit. We always went to the house in Briar Glen together. Connor, I called out, walking back into the kitchen. He was drying his hands on a dish towel. Yeah. Mom just texted. She wants me to come over early. And she specifically said to come alone. Connor paused, the towel hanging from his hand. He frowned, his brow furrowing. Alone. Why is everything okay? I don't know, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. She sounded strictly business. Maybe they want to talk about their estate planning again, or maybe they bought that vacation property they keep hinting at and want to surprise me before the extended family gets there. I was doing it again. I was spinning a narrative to cover the jagged edges of their behavior. I was filling in the blanks with benign explanations because the alternative that my parents were excluding my husband for a malicious reason was too uncomfortable to entertain. Connor checked his watch. Well, that actually works out. I just got a ping from the site foreman at the reservoirs project. There is a drainage issue they need me to sign off on remotely. It is going to take me about 40 minutes to review the schematics. You go ahead. I will drive over separately and meet you there around 7. Are you sure? I asked, a sudden, irrational spike of anxiety hitting my chest. I did not want to walk into that house alone. I wanted Connor as a buffer. His presence usually forced my parents to be polite. Without him, I was just their subordinate again. It is fine, Kat, he said, walking over and kissing me on the forehead. His lips were warm, grounding. Go. If they want to talk family business, let them. I will be there before you cut the cake. I nodded, clutching the bottle of wine like a talisman. Okay, see you there. I walked out to the garage, the click of my heels on the concrete echoing in the quiet house. I got into my car, a sensible sedan that I kept immaculately clean, and backed out of the driveway. The drive to Briar Glen usually took 45 minutes. I drove in silence. I did not turn on the radio. I needed the quiet to prepare my face. As I merged onto the highway, my mind drifted back to the text message. Come alone. Why did that phrase make my stomach turn? It was just a dinner. It was just a birthday. But with my parents, nothing was ever just anything. Every interaction was a transaction. I thought about my childhood. When other people talked about their youth, they mentioned tire swings, scraped knees, and the smell of cookies. When I thought about my childhood, I thought about metrics. I thought about the spreadsheet my father kept on the refrigerator door. It was not a chore chart. It was a performance chart. I remembered being 8 years old. I had come home with a spelling test. I had scored 98%. I had missed one word. Occurrence. I had forgotten the second R. I remembered handing the paper to my father. He was sitting in his leather armchair, the one I was not allowed to sit in. He took the paper, put on his reading glasses, and scanned it. He did not smile. He did not say good job. He took a red pen from his pocket and circled the missing R. Almost is not the same as done. Catriona, he had said, we invest in excellence. This is merely adequacy. I had spent the next week writing the word occurrence 500 times in a notebook until my hand cramped. I did not do it because he punished me. I did it because I wanted him to look at me and see something worth the investment. I wanted to be the asset that yielded high returns. That was the dynamic. That was the love I knew. It was conditional. It was a contract that renewed quarterly, based on performance. If I was well behaved, if I was top of my class, if I played the piano without stumbling, then I was safe. I was their daughter. If I faltered. The temperature in the house dropped. The silence would stretch for days. A heavy, suffocating blanket that made me desperate to fix whatever I had broken. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles were white. Why was I thinking about this now I was 30 years old? I was a project manager. I had a husband who loved me. I did not need their approval anymore. Liar. A voice in my head whispered, "You are going there tonight with a bottle of wine you researched to make sure it was rated 89 points or higher, just so they would not look at it with disdain. You are still that 8-year-old girl trying to spell occurrence correctly." I took a deep breath and forced my shoulders to relax. I needed to stop. This was supposed to be a happy occasion. Maybe they had changed. Maybe 30 was the milestone where they finally treated me like an adult equal. My mother had been so insistent on the time. Maybe they had a gift, a real gift, not a savings bond or a book on etiquette. Maybe they wanted to tell me they were proud of the woman I had become. I tried to visualize that scene, my father raising a glass, my mother smiling with genuine warmth. It felt like trying to imagine a shark eating a salad. It just did not compute. But I held on to the image anyway. It was my safety mechanism. If I anticipated kindness, I could walk through the door with a smile. If I anticipated the truth, I might turn the car around, and I was too well trained to run away. The suburbs of Briar Glen began to appear. Large, imposing houses set far back from the street. Lawns that looked like they had been manicured with nail scissors. It was a beautiful place, in the way a museum is beautiful, strictly controlled and not meant to be touched. I checked the dashboard clock. It was 5:55 in the evening. I was 5 minutes early. Perfect. Punctuality was one of the few things my father respected without qualification. I turned onto their street. My heart gave a little skip, a habitual reaction to the proximity of my childhood home. But as I approached the driveway, I slowed down. The sheer density of the vehicles parked along the curb should have been my first clue, but panic has a way of short-circuiting logic. As I had turned the corner onto the street where I grew up, seeing the glint of chrome and glass stretching halfway down the block, my mind did not immediately jump to a surprise party. It jumped to a catastrophe. My father was 68, my mother was 65. In my line of work, we call this a high-probability risk event. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning the color of old parchment, and thought, please let it be a fall. Please let it be something fixable like a broken hip and not a stroke. That was the conditioning of a lifetime kicking in. Even before I had parked, I was already managing the crisis, calculating the drive time to the nearest cardiac center, and mentally rearranging my work schedule to accommodate hospital visits. It was only when I maneuvered my sedan between a rusty pickup truck and a pristine luxury SUV that I realized there were no flashing lights. There was no ambulance in the driveway. The house stood stoic and illuminated, not in the chaotic strobe of emergency services, but in the steady, warm glow of a hosted event. The adrenaline that had spiked in my blood began to curdle into something else: confusion, mixed with a foolish, desperate hope. It was not a medical emergency, it was an occasion. I bypassed the front walkway. The front door of the Northvale residence was ceremonial, reserved for the mailman, religious canvassers, or the rare dinner guest who did not know the family code. I belonged to the garage. I keyed in the code on the keypad mounted to the frame, 1996, the year I had won the state spelling bee, and the heavy door groaned upward on its tracks. Stepping into the garage was like stepping into a decompression chamber. The air here was cooler, stagnant, and thick with the specific, comforting perfume of my father's organized life. It smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and the damp, pulpy scent of cardboard boxes stacked with military precision against the far wall. This smell was a narcotic to me. It triggered a reflex of safety. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of old gasoline and fertilizer settle my nerves. This was the backstage area of my childhood, the place where bikes were fixed and science fair volcanoes were constructed. It felt benign. It felt normal. I checked my reflection in the side mirror of my father's vintage sedan, which slept under a gray tarp like a dormant beast. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted the collar of my dress. I looked at the bottle of wine in my hand. Sweating slightly in the humidity, I was ready. I was the project manager. I was the good daughter. I reached for the handle of the interior door that led to the kitchen. I expected noise. I expected the sudden, cacophonous roar of happy birthday followed by the pop of champagne corks. I had prepared my face for it, a widened look of shock. A hand over the mouth. A laugh that signaled gratitude. I turned the knob and pushed. The door swung open, and I stepped across the threshold. It was not a wave of sound that hit me. It was a wave of cold. It was a physical sensation, a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. The kitchen was open concept, spilling directly into the sunken living room, and every square foot of that space was occupied. There were not 20 people here. There were not 30. A quick, terrified estimation by my data-trained brain put the number closer to 70 or 80. They were standing shoulder to shoulder. A dense forest of bodies filling the room from the granite island to the bay windows, and they were absolutely silent. There was no surprise. There was no music. There was no hum of conversation. As the door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoed like a gavel strike. 70 or 80 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me in unison. I stood frozen on the linoleum, the bottle of wine growing slick in my palm. My brain scrambled to process the visual data. This was a party. Surely. There were people. There was a buffet table set up against the far wall, though I noticed with a strange detachment that the food trays of cold cuts, bowls of potato salad looked untouched, the plastic wrap still clinging to the edges. But the atmosphere was wrong. It did not feel like a celebration. It felt like an intervention, or perhaps a wake where the body had not yet arrived. I began to scan the faces, looking for an anchor, looking for Connor, looking for anyone who would smile and break the spell. I saw Mrs. Gable from the Homeowners Association, wearing a floral blouse that seemed violently cheerful against the grim set of her mouth. I saw a man I vaguely recognized as my father's former business partner, a man who had not visited our house in 10 years. I saw neighbors who I had only ever waved to from the safety of a moving car. I saw distant cousins from my mother's side, people who lived 3 states away. Why were they here? Why had they traveled hundreds of miles for a 30th birthday party that I hadn't even known was happening? They were not looking at me with affection. They were looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked uncomfortably like pity. It was the way people look at a driver standing next to a wrecked car on the highway, thankful it isn't them, but unable to look away from the damage. My gaze finally found my parents. My mother was standing near the entrance to the dining room. She was wearing her gray silk dress, the one she saved for Easter services and funerals. She was not looking at me. Her head was bowed, her attention fixed intensely on the hardwood floor, as if she were inspecting the finish for scratches. Her posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken by some invisible weight. She looked like a child waiting to be scolded. My father stood by the fireplace. He dominated the room, as he always did. He was wearing his navy suit, the one he wore for board meetings. He was not holding a drink. He was holding a thick beige folder. The edges were tattered, stuffed with papers that threatened to spill out. He was not smiling. His face was a mask of stone, his jaw set in a line so hard I could see the muscle twitching beneath the skin. He looked at me. There was no warmth in his eyes. There was only assessment. A chill crawled up my spine, sharper and deeper than the air conditioning. This was a courtroom. The arrangement of the furniture, the way the guests were positioned in semicircles facing the hearth, the silence, it was all theatrical. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the bookshelf filled with encyclopedias that had never been read, a young man, a neighbor's son. I thought was holding a smartphone. He had it mounted on a small, flexible tripod that he was balancing against a stack of magazines. The red recording light was not blinking. It was solid. He was already filming. He was framing the shot to include me in the foreground and my father in the background. Why would someone film this? Not the cake cutting, not the speech, but the entry, the silence. My grip on the wine bottle tightened until my fingers turned white. I felt the glass biting into my palm. I should have asked a question. I should have said, "What is going on?" or "Why is everyone so quiet?" But the smile was still plastered on my face. It was a reflex I couldn't shut off. It was the smile of the compliant child, the smile that said, "I am happy to be here. I am grateful for your effort. I will not make a scene." I stood there, clutching a $19 bottle of Cabernet and smiling like a fool. And I knew, with a sinking, nauseating certainty, that this image, me, standing in the doorway with that idiotic, hopeful grin, would be the thing that haunted me the most in the years to come. It was the evidence of my own blindness. My mind began to race, frantic to bridge the gap between reality and expectation. I started to make excuses for them. A habit as ingrained as breathing. Mom looks down because she is exhausted. I told myself, she probably spent 3 days cleaning for this. She is just tired. Dad looks stern because he hates surprises. He is probably stressed about the cost of the catering. He is just waiting for the right moment to relax. The silence is just a joke. Someone is about to yell a cue, and then the music will start. I was doing it again. I was taking the knife they were holding and telling myself it was a spoon. I was standing in the center of a trap, admiring the craftsmanship of the cage. "Katrina," my father said. His voice was not loud, but in the vacuum of the room, it boomed. It was not a greeting, it was a summons. I took a step forward, my legs feeling like they were moving through deep water. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat and tried again, forcing the cheerfulness into the syllables. "Hi, everyone. Wow, this is incredible." I held up the wine bottle slightly, a pathetic offering to the tribunal. "I brought this for dinner. I didn't realize it was going to be an event." No one laughed. No one moved toward me to take the bottle. My mother flinched slightly at the sound of my voice, her shoulders curving inward as if to protect her chest. My father did not look at the wine. He tapped the folder against his open palm. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was dry and rhythmic. "Put the wine down. Katrina," he said. It was not a suggestion, it was an order. I looked around for a table, feeling suddenly clumsy and overgrown, like I was too big for the room. I placed the bottle on the nearest surface, a side table next to the entryway. The clink of the glass on the wood was deafening. "Come stand here," he said, pointing to a spot on the rug, directly in front of the fireplace. Directly in front of him, it was the spot where, 20 years ago, I used to stand to recite my multiplication tables. I walked toward him. I could feel the heat of the 70 or 80 bodies pressing in on me, their gaze heavy and suffocating. I walked past the neighbors who didn't say hello. I walked past the distant cousins who stared at me with blank, unreadable expressions. I walked to the center of the rug. I looked at my husband's empty spot in the room. Connor wasn't here. I was alone. I was 30 years old, a successful professional, a woman who managed million-dollar budgets and led teams of experts, and yet, standing on that Persian rug, I felt 12 years old again. I felt the phantom sensation of a spelling test with a red circle on it. I looked at my father, trying to find a trace of the parent I wanted him to be. "Dad," I whispered. He opened the folder. He didn't look at me. He looked at the first page of the document, his eyes scanning the lines with the cold precision of an auditor. "We have some business to conclude," he said to the room, as if I were not his daughter, but a vendor who had failed to deliver on a contract, and the boy in the corner adjusted his grip on the phone, making sure the angle was perfect. My father did not clear his throat. He did not offer a preamble. He did not say happy birthday. He simply flipped the cover of the beige folder with a snap of his wrist that echoed in the silent room. He adjusted his glasses, looking not at me, but at the typed pages before him. "See Northvale Expenditure Report," he read. "Fiscal years 1996 through 2026. The title hung in the air, absurd and terrifying. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, the taste of metal on my tongue. A report. He had written a report. "Page 1, he continued, his voice devoid of inflection. "Initial capital layout, 1996, maternity costs, nursery outfitting, formula, diapers, adjusted for inflation, $18,450. He looked up, his eyes flat. He was not reminiscing, he was auditing. "Page 2, medical and dental, orthodontia, 2008 through 2010. $4,000. $200. Emergency room visit, broken radial bone, summer of 2005. $1,500. Deductibles and copays over 30 years. $12,300. I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered that broken arm. I had fallen out of a tree in the backyard. I remembered crying, not because of the pain, but because I was afraid I had torn my dress. I remembered my father driving me to the hospital in silence, his jaw tight. I had thought he was worried. Now I realized he was calculating the premium increase. He turned the page. The sound of the paper sliding was violently loud. Educational investments, private tutoring, mathematics, 3 years, $5,600, piano instruction, 6 years, $7,200. You never reached concert proficiency, a sunk cost. He paused on that phrase, sunk cost. University contribution, he went on. $32,000. We paid the tuition that your scholarship did not cover. We assumed it was an investment in the family brand. He flipped through the remaining pages, summarizing the columns of figures that represented my existence. Summer camps, field trips, clothing allowances, the car insurance for the sedan I drove in high school, even the cost of the food I had eaten at their table. It was all there. Every calorie, every thread, every breath I had taken in their house had been logged, categorized, and tallied. Total expenditure, he announced, looking at the bottom line, $348,722.50. He closed the folder halfway, then looked at me. We have been too generous. We have carried a liability on our books for 3 decades. I could not breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by the weight of those numbers. I looked at the guests. Surely someone would stop this. Surely someone would laugh and say this was a cruel joke. But they stood there, their faces impassive, their eyes locked on me. They were the shareholders, and I was the failing asset being liquidated. Why? I whispered. The word came out as a croak. Why are you doing this? My father did not answer. He simply turned the page to the final section of the dossier. Supplemental findings, he read. Genetic verification, date of test, January 4th, 2026. He pulled a sheet of paper out of the folder and held it up. It was a standard lab report, the logo of a genetic testing company visible at the top. Probability of paternity, he read. 0%. Probability of maternity, 0%. The room seemed to tilt. The floorboards felt like they were liquefying under my heels. What? I said. The sound was high and thin. You are not our daughter, my father said. His tone did not change. It was the same tone he used to discuss the weather or the lawn maintenance. We suspected there was an anomaly. You never possessed the intellectual rigor of our line. You were always soft. We confirmed it this month. The hospital made a mistake 30 years ago. A logistic error. We have been raising a stranger. He said it as if I were a package delivered to the wrong address that he had finally gotten around to returning. I looked at my mother. She was still staring at the floor. She had not moved. Mom, I pleaded. Mom, tell him to stop. This is insane. I am your daughter. You raised me. My mother finally moved. She did not look at me. She turned to the corner near the pantry door. There was a bag sitting there. It was not a suitcase. It was not a piece of luggage. It was an old canvas laundry bag. The kind used for dirty linens. It was lumpy and stained. She walked over, grabbed the drawstring, and dragged it across the floor. The sound of the canvas scraping against the wood was jagged and harsh. She pulled it until it sat at my feet. Your personal effects, she said to the floor. Everything you bought with your own salary is in your apartment. Everything we provided is ours. This bag contains the items we have deemed negligible, old clothes, sentimental trinkets. You may take them. She stepped back, wiping her hands as if she had touched something unclean. I looked at the bag. I looked at the folder in my father's hand. I looked at the 70 people watching me, and then a sound started. Clap. It came from the back of the room. Clap, clap. It was not applause. It was a slow, rhythmic striking of hands. It was the sound of a gavel banging. It was the sound of a verdict being confirmed. Someone else joined in. Then another. It was sporadic. Dry applause. They were not cheering for me. They were applauding my parents for finally cutting the loss. They were applauding the correction of the error. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Hot and humiliating. I had promised myself I would not cry. I had promised I would be strong. But the cruelty was too precise. It was surgical. Suddenly, the front door, the main door that no one used, slammed open. The noise was like an explosion, shattering the rhythm of the clapping. The heavy oak door hit the wall with a violence that shook the frames of the pictures in the hallway. Everyone turned. Connor stood in the archway between the hall and the living room. He was out of breath. His chest was heaving. He was wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt covered in dust. He looked wild, frantic. He had tracked me. He had seen my dot on the map sitting in the driveway for too long without a check-in text. He knew. Somehow, he knew. He looked at me, standing alone in the center of the room with the laundry bag at my feet. He looked at my father holding the dossier. He looked at the crowd of strangers. The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The clapping died instantly. "Cat," Connor said, his voice rough. He walked into the room, ignoring the guests who scrambled to get out of his way. He came straight to me. He grabbed my shoulders, his hands hard and grounding. "Are you okay? What is happening?" He looked at my father. Connor was a calm man. I had never seen him lose his temper. But in that moment, his eyes were black with a rage so intense it terrified me. "What are you doing to her?" Connor demanded. His voice was low, a growl that vibrated in the floor. My father looked unimpressed. "We are settling accounts. Connor, this does not concern you, although, given the new information regarding her lineage, you may want to review your own legal standing." Connor opened his mouth to scream, to roar, to do something violent, but he was cut off. "Sit down, Connor." The voice came from the back of the room. It was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a diamond cutter through glass. It was a voice of absolute authority. The crowd parted. People shuffled aside. Looking nervous, a woman stood up from a folding chair in the back row. It was Eleanor Whitfall, my mother-in-law. I had not seen her. I did not know she was there. She was wearing a simple gray knit dress, unassuming and plain. She had been blending into the wallpaper, a silent observer, but now, as she stepped forward, she seemed to grow 6 inches. Eleanor was a retired paralegal, or at least, that was what she told people. But watching her walk toward the center of the room, I realized she carried herself like a high court judge. She did not look at me. She did not look at Connor. She looked directly at my father. She stopped 3 feet away from him. She looked at the folder in his hand. She looked at the boy in the corner who was still filming. "You are making a mistake, Arthur," she said. Her voice was cool, detached, and terrifyingly precise. My father sneered. "This is a private family matter. Eleanor, you were invited as a courtesy, and I attended as a witness," she corrected him. "You just presented a bill of invalid debts to a woman you claim is not your kin. You publicly defamed her character based on medical data you have no legal right to disseminate." She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with the boy holding the phone. "And you," she said to the room at large, "are creating digital evidence of harassment, emotional infliction of distress, and attempted extortion, and you are doing it in front of a neutral third party." She paused, letting the legal weight of the words settle over the room like a suffocating blanket. "If that recording continues for 1 more second," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout, "I will ensure that every single person in this room is named as a co-conspirator in the civil suit I will be filing on Monday morning." The boy with the phone turned pale. His hand shook. He fumbled with the screen, tapping frantically. The red light on the tripod blinked off. He shoved the phone into his pocket and took a step back, looking like he wanted to vanish through the wall. The room went dead silent. The neighbors looked at their shoes. The distant cousins shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw worked, but he did not speak. Eleanor turned to me. Her face softened. Just a fraction. It was the only warmth in the entire house. "Get your things, Katrina," she said. "We are leaving." I did not scream. I did not throw the folder at my father's feet. I did not overturn the table of untouched food. Those were the reactions of a person who still believed they had a place in the room. A person who thought their anger might be met with recognition. I had no place. I was a ghost who had just been exorcised. I bent down and gripped the drawstring of the canvas laundry bag. It was heavy, filled with the debris of a life that had been retroactively canceled. I tucked the beige dossier under my arm, pressing it against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I turned my back on the fireplace, on the man and woman who had raised me, and I began to walk. The path to the door was a gauntlet. To get out, I had to walk through the living room, past the 70 or 80 people who had watched my execution in silence. I kept my head high, not out of pride, but out of a mechanical necessity to keep moving. I looked at them, but I did not see faces. I saw a graveyard. I passed Mrs. Gable, dead to me. I passed the uncle who taught me to fish, dead. I passed the neighbor who had watered our plants when we went on vacation, dead. They were not people anymore. They were tombstones with eyes, markers of relationships that had been severed by a single sheet of paper. They shifted as I approached, parting like the Red Sea, terrified that my misfortune might be contagious. I could smell them, the mix of expensive perfume, dry cleaning chemicals, and the sour sweat of discomfort. Connor was at my side in an instant. He was vibrating with kinetic energy, his hands balling into fists. He looked ready to turn back, to tear the room apart, to shake my father until the truth fell out of his pockets. "Cat," he rasped, his voice thick with fury. "We are not just walking away. We are going to—" I stopped. I didn't look back at the room. I looked at the buttons on Connor's flannel shirt. I focused on the stitching. "Don't," I whispered. My voice was steady, terrifyingly so. "Don't say anything to them. And Connor, don't let them see me cry. Just walk me to the car." It was a plea born of a desperate, final scrap of dignity. If I cried in front of them, I validated their pity. If I cried, I was the broken merchandise they had returned. I needed to be stone. Connor swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob. He understood. He wrapped his arm around my waist, taking the weight of the laundry bag from my hand with his other arm, and shielded me with his body. He became a wall between me and the audience. We walked out. As I passed the entryway table, I saw the bottle of wine I had brought, the $19 Cabernet. Without breaking stride, I reached out and grabbed it by the neck. It was mine. I had paid for it with my own money. Money earned from a job I had secured with my own credentials. They would not keep it. They would not drink it after I left and toast to their balanced ledger. We stepped into the cool night air. The garage door was still open. I walked straight to my car, the silence of the driveway feeling louder than the silence inside. Eleanor was already there, standing by the passenger door of my sedan. She didn't say a word. She just opened the back door for herself and got in. Connor tossed the laundry bag into his truck, then came to my window. "I will drive," he said. "No," I said. I needed to do something with my hands. I needed to operate a machine. "I am driving. Follow me." I didn't wait for him to argue. I got in, threw the wine and the dossier onto the passenger seat, and keyed the ignition. I backed out of the driveway without looking at the house. I did not check the rearview mirror. I knew what was back there. A house that was no longer a home. I drove for 20 minutes without a destination in mind. My brain was a white static. Eventually, the neon sign of the Maplebee Diner appeared on the roadside, a beacon of yellow and black buzzing against the darkness. It was a 24-hour place, the kind of establishment that smelled of grease and sanitizer, where truck drivers and college students went to be alone together. It was perfect. It was neutral ground. I parked. Connor pulled his truck into the slot next to mine. We went inside and slid into a booth in the back corner. The vinyl seats were sticky, patched with duct tape. The fluorescent lights were harsh, humming with a frequency that made my teeth ache. A waitress named Brenda, according to her name tag, wandered over. She looked tired. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "3 coffees, and pancakes, blueberry pancakes, with extra syrup." "It is 8 o'clock at night, hun," Brenda said, pen hovering. "I know," I said. I needed the pancakes. I needed something childish and soft and normal. I needed to perform the ritual of ordering food to convince my body that I was still alive. That I was still a biological entity that required sustenance, not just a line item on a spreadsheet. When Brenda left, I reached for the dossier. I placed it on the Formica table. The beige cover looked stark against the speckled gray surface. I opened it. Connor sat next to me, his thigh pressing against mine. Eleanor sat across from us, her hands folded on the table. I skipped the total. I went to the itemized list. Summer camp, Lake Winnipesaukee, 2009, $1,400. I stared at the line. I remembered that summer. I remembered writing letters home every day, begging them to come visit on Parents' Weekend. They never came. My father had said it was not cost-effective to drive 4 hours for a 2-hour lunch. Now I knew. It wasn't about the drive. It was about the investment cap. SAT preparation course, 2012, $800. Emergency appendectomy, 2014. Out-of-pocket expenses. I traced the numbers with my fingertip. This was the true violence. It wasn't the DNA result. Biology is random. Biology is chaos. But this was calculated. Every hug I had ever received, every meal I had ever eaten, had been mentally logged as a debt. They hadn't been raising a child. They had been managing a failing stock portfolio. They had looked at me across the dinner table for 30 years and seen a red arrow pointing down. They kept receipts, I said, my voice flat. Who keeps receipts for a child's braces? People who are building a case, Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried that steel edge I had seen in the living room. She reached into her purse, a sensible, worn leather bag, and pulled out a thin white envelope. She didn't hand it to me immediately. She placed it on the table, covering the expenditure report with it. I did not just come tonight to witness, Eleanor said. I came because I knew what was in that folder before your father opened it, or at least, I suspected the nature of it. I looked up at her. How? Because Arthur Northvale is not the only one who keeps records, she said. She pushed the envelope toward me. Open it. I tore the flap. Inside was a single photocopy. It looked old. The paper was grainy. The font consistent with a typewriter or an early dot matrix printer. It was a medical intake form. At the top, the letterhead read, Stonemere Fertility Pavilion. I frowned. Stonemere. I thought Dad said it was a hospital mistake, a switch in the nursery. Hospitals make mistakes with bracelets, Eleanor said. Stonemere is not a hospital. It is a private, high-end fertility clinic. It is where the wealthy go when they want to ensure a specific outcome. I looked at the document. It was dated 1995. My mother's name was on it. Patient Evelyn Northvale. If you were born through Stonemere, Eleanor said, then you were not swapped in a bassinet. You were an embryo, or a gamete sample. The mistake happened in a petri dish, Katrina, or in a freezer. The air in the diner seemed to vanish. A hospital swap was a tragedy, 2 babies placed in the wrong plastic tubs. It was human error. But this was industrial. This was scientific. That means, I started, but the thought was too big to articulate. It means it was not just a mix-up, Connor said, reading over my shoulder. You don't mix up embryos unless your protocols are garbage, or unless someone is moving things around on purpose. I looked at the paper again. Stonemere. The name sounded heavy, expensive. It sounded like a fortress. How did you get this? I asked Eleanor. I used to work in records for a law firm that handled insurance disputes, she said, enigmatic. I have a memory for names, and I have a memory for cover-ups. when Connor mentioned your parents were acting strange about genetic testing months ago. I made a few calls to old friends. I turned to Connor. You knew they were acting strange months ago. Connor flinched. He pulled his hand away from mine on the table. I didn't know this. Kat, I swear, about 2 months ago, your dad called me. He asked weird questions about ancestry sites. He asked if we had ever done one of those DNA kits for fun. I thought he was just being old, paranoid about privacy or something. I didn't think he was vetting you. And tonight, I asked, you were late? I was at a site meeting, he said, his eyes pleading. But then I saw the text on your phone, the one about coming alone, and I got this feeling in my gut. It was like ice. I drove 80 miles an hour to get there. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't think it was this. I looked at him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. He was the only thing in the world that felt solid, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Everyone lied. Everyone had a secret file. The waitress returned with the pancakes. She slid the plate in front of me. The smell of artificial blueberry syrup hit my nose, and my stomach turned. I couldn't eat. The idea of swallowing felt impossible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my work calendar. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., quarterly review. I stared at the screen. I was a project manager. I had responsibilities. I had a team. I had to go to work tomorrow and pretend I was a person. I can't go in, I said. I opened my email app. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I needed to write to my boss. I needed a reason. Dear Mr. Henderson. I typed, I am writing to request emergency leave. I paused. What was the truth? I cannot come in because my parents presented me with a bill for my childhood and informed me I am a genetic error from a fertility clinic. I deleted the line. I have a family emergency. No, I didn't have a family. That was the point. I felt a sob rising in my throat. Hot and sharp. I swallowed it down. I would not cry in the Maplebee diner. I am unwell. I typed, severe stomach virus. Will update in 24 hours. It was a lie. But it was the only sentence I could construct that wouldn't shatter me. I hit send. The swoosh sound of the email departing felt like a door closing. Let's go, I said. I can't be here. I left the pancakes untouched. I left a $20 bill on the table, overtipping because I felt guilty for taking up space. We walked back to the cars. Connor tried to hug me again, but I stepped back. I needed space. I needed to not be touched. I will follow you home, he said, looking hurt but accepting. Okay, I said. I got into my sedan. The smell of the interior, my vanilla air freshener, my gym bag in the back usually calmed me. Now it felt like a stranger's car. I looked at the passenger seat. The bottle of wine was lying there. It had rolled onto the floor mat during the drive. I reached down and picked it up. The label, Chateau Briar, had snagged on the seat track. A corner of it was peeled back, exposing the dull glass underneath. It looked cheap. It looked pathetic. A bottle of wine meant for a celebration that never existed, bought by a daughter who didn't exist, for parents who were never hers. I held it in my lap for a moment, the cold glass seeping through my dress. I didn't open it. I didn't throw it out the window. I just let it sit there, a silent passenger in a vehicle that was moving, but had nowhere left to go. 2 days after the night that dismantled my identity. Eleanor drove me to a place that felt less like a home and more like a fortress of solitude. We crossed the state line into Rhode Island, the landscape shifting from the suburban sprawl of my old life to the jagged, gray coastline of Mariner's Point. The ocean here was not the playful, sandy beach of vacation brochures. It was dark, churning, and cold, crashing against rocks that looked like broken teeth. We pulled up to a gate made of wrought iron. Eleanor rolled down her window and spoke into an intercom. The gate swung open silently. We drove up a winding gravel path to a house that sat on a cliff. Staring down the Atlantic, it was a sprawling estate of weathered shingles and white trim, beautiful in a way that felt lonely. They are good people. Katrina, Eleanor said, her hands tight on the steering wheel. But they are hurting. Be prepared for that. I did not know how to prepare for strangers who claimed to be my blood. I sat in the passenger seat, wearing a blazer I had bought for a job interview 3 years ago, trying to look like a person who had herself together. But inside, I felt like a fraud. I was about to walk into a room and audition for the role of daughter, a role I had already been fired from once this week. Connor had driven his truck separately. He was already there, leaning against the hood of his vehicle, staring at the ocean. When he saw us, he didn't smile. He walked over and opened my door. He took my hand, but his grip was loose, distracted. He was looking at the house with a gaze I couldn't decipher, calculating, perhaps, or wary. The front door opened before we even reached the steps. A woman and a man stood there. They were in their early 60s, dressed in cashmere and linen, the kind of clothes that whispered money rather than shouted it. The woman, Marla Ainsworth, had hair the color of spun silver and eyes that were so blue they looked brittle. The man, Everett, was tall, with a stoop in his shoulders that suggested a heavy burden. As I climbed the steps, Marla let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Oh, God," she whispered. She didn't wait for an introduction. She didn't wait for a handshake. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was not a hug. It was a collision. She buried her face in my neck, her body shaking with a violence that alarmed me. She smelled of expensive soap and old grief. I stood there, stiff and awkward, my arms hovering by my sides, unsure if I was allowed to touch her back. "You look just like her," Marla sobbed against my skin. "Everett, look. She has the chin. She has the eyes." Everett approached slowly. He didn't hug me. He reached out and touched my arm, his fingers trembling. He looked at me with a hunger that made me want to step back. It wasn't predatory, but it was consuming. He was looking for something in my face, tracing the lines of my jaw with his eyes, searching for a ghost. "Welcome home," Everett said, his voice cracking. They ushered us into a living room that was larger than my entire apartment in Charlotte. A fire was roaring in the grate, but the room still felt cold. We sat on plush, velvet sofas. Marla sat next to me, refusing to let go of my hand. Her grip was tight, possessive. "We have been looking for you," Everett said, pouring tea from a silver pot. His hands shook, the china rattling against the saucer. "For 6 months, ever since the audit." "The audit?" I asked. "Medical audit," Everett corrected. "I had a heart condition last year. My cardiologist recommended genetic screening for the immediate family to check for hereditary markers. We tested our daughter, Sloane." He said the name Sloane, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. Marla let out a sharp, wounded noise. "The markers didn't match," Everett continued, his eyes fixed on the tea. 0% probability of parentage. We thought it was a lab error. We tested again. Then we hired a private investigator to look into the Stonemere Clinic records. We found the discrepancies in the embryo logs from 1995. I nodded slowly. It was the same story, the mirror image of my own nightmare. "So, where is she?" I asked the question gently, assuming Sloane was out there somewhere, perhaps dealing with her own version of my birthday party. Marla squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles popped. "Sloane passed away," she whispered. 11 months ago." I froze. "She had a heart defect," Marla said, the tears streaming down her face again, unheeded. "Undiagnosed until it was too late. That was why we did the screening, to see if we could have prevented it, to see if it was our fault." She looked at me, her blue eyes swimming with a desperate, terrifying intensity. "But it wasn't our fault," she said, "because she wasn't ours, and now we found you." The weight of the situation crashed down on me. They weren't just looking for a lost child. They were looking for a replacement. They were grieving parents who had been handed a miracle cure, a spare daughter, who looked just enough like the dead one to dull the pain. I felt a sudden urge to run. I wasn't Katrina Northvale, the project manager, to them. I was not Sloane. I was a vessel for them to pour their unspent love into. "We want to make this right," Everett said, leaning forward. "We know we have missed 30 years. We can't buy that time back. But we can ensure your future." He gestured to the room, to the view of the ocean, to the world of wealth that surrounded us. "We have set up a trust," he said. "Housing, a stipend. You can move here. There is a guest cottage on the grounds. Or we can buy you a place in town if you prefer privacy. We want to take care of you. Katrina. We want to be the parents we were robbed of being." It was a staggering offer. In practical terms, it solved every problem I had. I was jobless, familyless, and emotionally bankrupt. They were offering me a golden parachute, but it felt like a transaction. My first parents had billed me for my existence. These parents were trying to prepay for my affection. "I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Say you will stay," Marla pleaded. "Just for a few days. Get to know us. Let us look at you." She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Sloane had this same hair, thick, wavy. She used to wear it in a braid when she went sailing. She paused, looking at me with expectant eyes. "Do you sail?" Katrina Sloane was a champion. She loved the water. I looked at her. I hated the ocean. I got seasick on ferries. My idea of a good time was a library and a coffee shop, not a wet deck and howling wind. "I don't sail," I said quietly. Marla's face fell. The light in her eyes dimmed, just for a second, before she forced a smile back onto her lips. "That is okay," she said, though her tone suggested it was not okay at all. "We can teach you. It is in your blood. You just haven't had the chance to try." She was rewriting me already. She was editing my personality to fit the script she had written for Sloane. Everett stood up. "I have something for you." He walked to a mahogany cabinet and pulled out a wooden box. It was beautifully carved, polished to a shine. He brought it over and placed it on the coffee table in front of me. "These were hers," he said softly. "We want you to have them." I stared at the box. "I can't. Those are personal." "Open it," Marla urged. "Please." I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, there was a collection of life, a silver locket, a ribbon from a sailing regatta, a diary with a leather cover, a seashell, a photograph of a smiling blonde girl standing on a boat, looking radiant and windblown. She looked like me, but she looked like a happier, shinier version of me. She looked like the version of me that had been raised with money and love instead of spreadsheets and audits. "She would have wanted you to have them," Everett said. I looked at the photo. I felt a strange, hollow jealousy. This girl, Sloane, had lived my life. She had eaten my meals, hugged my parents, spent my inheritance, and now that she was gone, I was supposed to inherit her leftovers. I looked up at Connor. He was sitting in an armchair in the corner, silent. He hadn't said a word since we arrived. He was watching the Ainsworths with a hawk-like intensity. His eyes darted from Marla's gripping hand to Everett's eager face. "Connor," I said, looking for an exit strategy, looking for him to say we needed to go. Connor didn't stand up. He crossed his legs, looking comfortable but alert. "It is a generous offer," he said. His voice was neutral, devoid of the protectiveness I expected. "Catriona needs stability right now. Maybe we should hear the details of the trust." I stared at him. Was he serious? Was he negotiating? I wanted him to pull me out of there, to tell them I wasn't a doll to be dressed up in dead clothes. But he sat there, looking at Everett with a cool, professional detachment. "What about the legal side?" Connor asked Everett. "If Stonemere made a mistake, there are liability issues. Are you pursuing that?" Everett nodded grimly. "We have a legal team. We are going to destroy that clinic. We want you to join the suit. Katrina, your testimony, your existence is the final nail in their coffin." "Is that why I'm here?" I asked, the thought suddenly crystallizing. "To be evidence." "No," Marla cried, looking horrified. "No, you are here because you are our daughter." But the doubt had taken root. I looked at the box of keepsakes. I looked at Connor. who seemed more interested in the lawsuit than my comfort. I looked at the ocean churning outside the window. A man in a dark suit entered the room. He had been waiting in the hallway. "Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth," he said. "Sorry to interrupt." "This is Mr. Sterling," Everett said. "Our attorney." Mr. Sterling walked in, carrying a briefcase. He looked at me, then at Connor. "I have an update on the Stonemere discovery phase," Sterling said. He didn't seem to care that this was an emotional reunion. He was all business. "We found a reciprocal file." "Reciprocal?" Connor asked, leaning forward. "The Ainsworth embryo wasn't just lost," Sterling said, pulling a document from his bag. "It was swapped. Specifically, we know where the other baby went." He looked at me. "Katrina went to the Northvales," he said. "And the Northvale baby, the biological child of Arthur and Evelyn Northvale, went somewhere else." I blinked. "Wait, you mean there is a third person?" "No," Sterling said. "Sloan wasn't the Northvale baby. Sloan was a third party entirely. The records are a mess. It wasn't a one-to-one swap. It was a chain." He placed a paper on the table next to Sloan's memory box. "We found a manifest," Sterling said. "There is another woman. Her name is Rory Calder. She lives in Ohio, according to the log codes. She is the one carrying the genetic material that belongs to the couple who raised Katrina." My head spun. It was a domino effect. I was the Ainsworth's child. Rory Calder was the Northvale's child, and Sloan was someone else's entirely. "So who was Sloan?" I whispered, looking at the photo of the dead girl who had lived my life. "We don't know yet," Everett said, his voice hard. "But we will find out, and we will make them pay." Marla squeezed my hand again, pulling my attention back to her. "Forget about the others for now," she said feverishly. "You are here. You are ours. That is all that matters. You will stay. Won't you? You will sleep in Sloane's room tonight. I kept it exactly how she left it." I looked at her pleading eyes. I looked at the dead girl's room waiting for me upstairs. I felt like I was being swallowed whole. I started to say no. "She will stay," Connor said. I whipped my head around to look at him. "She needs a place," Connor said firmly, looking at me with eyes that were trying to tell me something I couldn't read. "And we need to be close to the legal team. She will stay." I looked at my husband. He wasn't protecting me from them. He was positioning me, whether it was for the money, the lawsuit, or something else. I didn't know. But for the first time in our marriage, I didn't trust the man standing next to me. "Okay," I whispered, because I had nowhere else to go. "I will stay." The guest cottage on the Ainsworth estate was a misnomer. It was a 2-story structure made of cedar and glass, larger than the house I had just been evicted from in spirit, if not in deed. The interior was decorated in shades of seafoam and cream, breathless and sterile. It smelled of lavender and money. Connor closed the door behind us, shutting out the roar of the Atlantic Ocean. He let out a long exhale, the kind that was supposed to signal the end of a shift, the transition from crisis mode to relaxation. He rolled his shoulders and reached for his bag. "Well," he said, keeping his back to me. "That went better than expected. They seem stable, intense, but stable, and the legal resources they have are going to be crucial." I stood in the center of the room, still wearing my blazer, my arms crossed over my chest to hold myself together. I felt like a wire pulled so tight it was humming. "Connor," I said. He turned, a casual smile plastered on his face. It was the smile he used when a client asked for a change order he didn't want to fulfill. "Yeah. You okay? You need some water." "Did you know?" I asked. The question hung in the air, sharp and unadorned. It did not need context. Connor's smile faltered, then vanished. He looked down at his boots. "Did I know that you were an Ainsworth?" "Don't play with me," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Not tonight. Did you know about Stonemere? Did you know my parents were digging? Did you know Eleanor was going to be there with a folder full of ammunition?" He walked over to the kitchenette and opened the fridge. Stalling, he took out a bottle of sparkling water. I didn't know the specifics. Kat, I swear. Specifics, I repeated. That is a very careful word, he sighed, twisting the cap off. Look, a few months ago, my mom mentioned something about a class action inquiry regarding Stonemere. She used to work in liability. You know that. She hears things. She mentioned that files were missing from the 90s. She said it was going to be a mess. And you didn't think to mention it to me. Why would I? He asked, throwing his hands up. It was legal gossip. I didn't know you were connected to Stonemere. I thought you were born at Mercy General like everyone else in Charlotte. But you knew my parents were acting strange, I pressed. You said it at the diner. You said my father asked about DNA tests. Connor leaned against the counter, looking trapped. Yeah, okay. He called me in November. He asked if we had done any of those ancestry kits. He asked if I was sure about my own lineage. It was a weird conversation. I thought he was losing it. I thought maybe he was worried about his own health history. You didn't tell me, I said. My father calls you, asks for a genetic audit effectively, and you didn't tell your wife. I didn't want to upset you, Connor snapped. You know how you get with them. You are always trying to please them, always analyzing every word they say for hidden meaning. I thought if I told you, you would spend weeks agonizing over why your dad was asking about bloodlines. I was trying to protect you from their crazy. You weren't protecting me, I said, the realization landing like a stone. You were managing me. You were managing the situation. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man who fixed faucets, the man who was practical. I realized then that his practicality was a double-edged sword. He treated problems and people as things to be contained, not understood. And tonight, I asked, you volunteered me to stay here, with strangers. You didn't ask me. You told them I would stay. It is strategic. Kat, Connor said, stepping forward, his voice lowering to a reasonable, persuasive tone. Look at this place. Look at their resources. Your parents, the Northvales, are going to come at you hard. They presented that ledger for a reason. They are going to try to bill you, sue you, or worse. The Ainsworths have the firepower to stop them. We need to be close to that. I asked. Connor paused. He reached into his jacket pocket. That brings me to the other thing. He pulled out a folded document. It wasn't thick, just 3 or 4 pages. He placed it on the kitchen island. What is that? I asked, not moving to touch it. It is a post-nuptial agreement, Connor said. He said it quickly, like he was ripping off a bandage. Or rather, a temporary asset separation agreement. I stared at the paper, then I stared at him. A what? Just listen, he said, holding up his hands. My mom and I talked about it on the drive over, with everything coming out the Stonemere lawsuit. The potential countersuit from your parents regarding the debt they claim you owe. The identity fraud issues your financial status is going to be radioactive for a while. If we keep our assets commingled, the Northvales could come after my business. They could freeze our joint accounts. He tapped the paper. This just isolates my landscaping business and the house deed from any litigation targeting you. It protects us. It ensures that no matter what happens in court, we have a safe harbor. It is just a firewall. Kat, it is standard procedure in high-risk litigation. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that was far deeper than the chill of the ocean air. A firewall, I repeated. Yes, Connor said, looking relieved that I seemed to understand the terminology. Exactly. We sign this. And they can't touch what I have built. It means I can support you without risking the company. It made sense. Logistically, rationally, mathematically. It made perfect sense. It was exactly the kind of move I would have recommended to a client at Crownspire Metrics Bureau. Isolate the risk. Protect the core assets. But I wasn't a client. I was his wife. You are betting against me, I whispered. No, I am betting on us surviving, Connor argued. I am being the adult here. Kat, I am making sure we don't lose the roof over our heads because your father decides to sue you for the price of 30 years of groceries. You are asking me to sign a paper that says if I go down alone, I said. You are drawing a line down the middle of the bed. I am trying to keep the bed from being repossessed, he shouted, his patience fraying. I looked at the document. It was the second time in 3 days that a man I loved had handed me a ledger. First my father, now my husband. Both of them looked at me and saw a liability. Both of them looked at the balance sheet and decided I was too risky to carry without insurance. I need air, I said. Kat, please, just read it, Connor said. I said I need air, I yelled, the sound tearing out of my throat. I turned and walked out the sliding glass door onto the deck. The wind hit me hard, whipping my hair across my face. It was pitch black out there, the ocean just a roaring void. I gripped the railing, breathing in the salt spray, trying to stop the shaking in my hands. I stood there for a long time, 5 minutes, 10. I heard the door slide open behind me. I stiffened, expecting Connor. He is right about the strategy, a voice said, but he is wrong about the timing. It was Eleanor. I didn't turn around. Did you write the agreement for him? I drafted it, Eleanor admitted. She moved up beside me, leaning her elbows on the railing. She was smoking a slim cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the dark. I advised him to protect his business. You are about to enter a war. Katrina, collateral damage is real. You are supposed to be on my side, I said bitterly. I am, Eleanor said. She took a drag and exhaled smoke into the wind. That is why I am out here telling you the truth, instead of letting you believe this is just a messy family drama. It is not drama. It is a preemptive strike. What do you mean? The ledger, Eleanor said. The expenditure report your father gave you. You think he wrote that just to be cruel? You think he spent hours calculating inflation and interest just to hurt your feelings? It felt pretty personal, I said. It was personal, but it was also legal. Eleanor said, think about it. Why give it to you in front of witnesses? Why record it? Why emphasize the debt and the fraud? She turned to look at me, her eyes sharp in the gloom. They are building a defense, she said. If the Stonemere truth comes out that they knowingly bought a black market embryo or swapped one, or whatever they did, they are looking at criminal charges, trafficking, fraud. But if they paint themselves as the victims, if they claim they were duped by the clinic and burdened with a child they didn't order, if they claim you were the beneficiary of their charity for 30 years. She flicked ash over the railing. The ledger proves damages, she explained. They are establishing that you cost them money. They are preparing to sue the clinic and possibly you for restitution. They kicked you out publicly to establish the date of separation. They are cutting the link so they can claim they stopped investing the moment they learned the truth. It is mitigation of damages. 101. I stared at her. The horror of it was so complete, it was almost beautiful. My father hadn't just hated me. He had used my birthday to establish a legal timeline. The humiliation was just a necessary byproduct of filing a claim. They are going to say I defrauded them, I asked. I was an infant. They will say the clinic defrauded them, and you are the living evidence of that fraud. Eleanor said, you are not a person to them anymore. Katrina, you are a defective product they are trying to return for a refund, and because they can't return you to the store, they are going to sue for the purchase price plus maintenance. She looked back at the glass door where Connor was pacing in the kitchen. My son sees the storm coming, Eleanor said. He is trying to board up his windows. He is not brave. Katrina, he never has been. He is safe. That is why you married him. You wanted safe. I wanted a partner, I said. Then you need to tell him that, Eleanor said, because right now, he is acting like your insurance broker. She crushed the cigarette out on the railing and put the butt in her pocket. Read the agreement. Don't sign it. But read it. It will tell you exactly how much he thinks you are worth. She slid the door open and went back inside. I stayed in the cold for another minute. I looked at the ocean. I thought about the Northvale ledger. $348,000. That was my price tag. I turned and went back inside. Connor looked up as I entered. He looked hopeful. "Did Mom talk to you?" he asked. "She did," I said. I walked over to the island. I picked up the document he had placed there. Asset separation and liability. Waiver. I looked at him. "You are scared." "I am prudent," he corrected. "You are scared." I repeated. "And that is okay. It is a scary thing. My parents are monsters. This lawsuit is going to be ugly. I get it." I folded the paper in half, then I folded it again. "But I am not a project you get to manage. Connor, I am not a leaky faucet you fix by turning off the water main." I looked him in the eye. "I am going to fight them," I said. "I am going to fight my parents. I am going to fight Stonemere. And I am going to find out who I actually am. And I need to know if the person standing next to me is my husband, or just a guy who is worried about his landscaping trucks." "Kat, that is not fair," he said, flushing red. "Fair is a place where you get cotton candy," I said. "This is reality. Here's the deal. You can put that paper in the shredder, and we stand together, all the way, win or lose, or you can sign it, but if you sign it to protect your assets from my life, then you don't get to be part of my life when the dust settles." "You are giving me an ultimatum," he asked, incredulous. "I am giving you a choice," I said. "You stand beside me, or you stand outside, but you don't get to stand in the middle, not anymore." I dropped the folded paper on the counter. It hit the granite with a soft thud. "Decide," I said. "Tonight." I walked past him, toward the stairs that led to the dead girl's bedroom, leaving him alone with his firewall. I sat at the desk of a dead girl, illuminated only by the blue spectral glow of my laptop screen. Sloane Ainsworth's room was a shrine to a life of leisure sailing trophies, watercolor paintings of the coast, shelves lined with first editions. It was a soft room, but the work I was doing was hard. I had spent the last hour staring at the digital scan of the expenditure report my father had handed me. I had taken a picture of every page with my phone back at the diner before Connor and Eleanor had seen the full extent of the damage. Now. I was not looking at it as a victim. I was looking at it as a project manager at Crownspire Metrics Bureau. My job was to find patterns in chaos. My job was to detect risk, and my father, for all his meticulous cruelty, was a sloppy accountant. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my laptop. I began to cross-reference the line items in his dossier with my own reconstructed timeline. I accessed my bank records, which I had archived since I was 18, and my old academic calendars. The first crack in his narrative appeared on page 4. Item: orthodontic adjustments. Date: November 2009. Cost $350. I frowned. I had my braces removed in 2006. I tapped my fingers against the mahogany desk. Why would he charge me for dental work 3 years after the metal was off my teeth? I scrolled down. Item: behavioral therapy retreat. Date: July 2012. Cost $2,000. I froze. In July of 2012, I was not at a retreat. I was working a double shift at a bookstore to save money for my first car. I had never gone to therapy in high school. My parents didn't believe in it. They called psychology a crutch for the weak. I leaned closer to the screen. These weren't just inflated costs. They were fabrications. Or rather, they were real expenses, but they weren't for me. I opened a new tab and navigated to the credit bureau. I had to answer 3 security questions to get in, identifying streets I had lived on and cars I had owned. When the dashboard loaded, I went straight to the history of closed accounts. My breath hitched. There was a line of credit opened in 2018. The lender was a small regional bank. The authorized user was Katrina Northvale. The limit was $50,000. I clicked on the details. The account had been maxed out within 3 months and then paid off in minimum increments over 5 years. The associated business name attached to the loan application was Northvale Hearth and Patio. I typed the name into the state business registry. Northvale Hearth and Patio. Status dissolved. Principal Officer Arthur Northvale. My father had opened a business. He had failed. And instead of taking the hit on his own credit score, he had used my name. I pulled up the loan application document, which was archived as a PDF. I zoomed in on the signature line. It read, Catriona E., Northvale. The loops on the capital C were sweeping and ornate. I never signed with my middle initial. Never. And I wrote with a jagged, hurried script. This signature was elegant. It was my mother's handwriting. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. The expenditure report wasn't just a tool to humiliate me. It was a cover-up. They were listing these debts as investments in Katrina to justify why money had disappeared from the family accounts. If they ever got audited, they could point to this dossier and say, "See, we spent it on the daughter." I was not just an unwanted child. I was a tax shelter. I was a money mule. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to keep moving. I needed more. If they were this sloppy with the money, they would be sloppy with the communications. I logged into the cloud storage account I had set up for them 5 years ago. I was the one who had migrated their old desktop files to the cloud because my mother was terrified of losing her digital scrapbooks. I knew the password. It was Briar Glen. 1980, the year they bought the house. I bypassed the photo albums. I went to the folder labeled Admin. There were thousands of files, tax returns, warranty scans, recipes. I sorted by date, looking for anything from the last few years. I found a subfolder labeled Correspondence. Inside, there was an archive of emails exported from my father's old account. I searched for the keyword Stonemere. Nothing. I searched for clinic. Nothing. I paused. My father was paranoid. He wouldn't use the real names. I thought about the dates. Eleanor had said the Ainsworths started their audit 6 months ago. But if my parents were building a defense, they must have known earlier. I searched for the word settlement. One result popped up. It was a PDF of a wire transfer receipt, dated 4 years ago. Amount $75,000. Sender S. P. Holdings, LLC, recipient Arthur Northvale. Memo non-disclosure agreement / final release of claims. S. P. Holdings. Stonemere Pavilion. My stomach turned over. They hadn't just found out. They had known for at least 4 years. They had taken $75,000 of hush money from the clinic to keep quiet about the mistake. And then I found the email. It was dated 2 days after the wire transfer. It was from my father to my mother. The subject line was simply, "Record discrepancy, do not discuss." I clicked it open. Evelyn, the funds have cleared. We are secure for the patio project. Regarding the girl, nothing changes yet. We maintain the baseline. We will utilize the asset until the liability outweighs the utility. If the clinic goes under, we pivot to the victim narrative. Keep the receipts. All of them. Arthur, the girl, not Katrina, not our daughter, the girl. Utilize the asset. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. They hadn't been waiting for my 30th birthday to tell me the truth because they were heartbroken. They had been waiting because they were using me. They had kept me around for 4 years after finding out I wasn't theirs because why? Because I was paying for their nursing home insurance. Because I was the face of their respectability in the neighborhood. They had taken $75,000 to sell me out, and then, when the Ainsworths started sniffing around and the secret was about to blow, they decided to cut me loose and bill me for the privilege. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Jay, it's Katrina. Jay was a forensic data analyst I worked with on the Crownspire infrastructure project. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. Kat, it is midnight. I know. I am sorry. I just sent you a file, a PDF of a DNA report. I need you to look at the metadata. Tell me when it was created. Now. Right now. Jay, please. It is life or death. I could hear him shifting. The click of a keyboard. Okay. Giving it a look. Hold on. I waited. listening to the silence of the big, empty house. The ocean outside sounded like it was trying to chew through the cliffs. "Weird," Jay said after a minute. "The content of the report, the actual genetic markers, looks like a scan of an original document from a lab system. That data is old, but the file itself, the PDF container, it was created yesterday morning, at 8:45. Yesterday. Yeah, and someone edited the headers. The original file name in the metadata is stonemere_settlement_exhibit_b.pdf, but the title on the document you see is just DNA results. Someone scrubbed the legal tags off it to make it look like a fresh medical report." "Thank you, Jay," I whispered. "Delete it. Forget I called." I hung up. It was a setup, all of it. The birthday party wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a staged event. They had taken a legal exhibit from their settlement 4 years ago, repackaged it, and presented it as a shocking new discovery to create a scene. They needed witnesses. They needed a public break. Why? To insulate themselves from the lawsuit Eleanor was threatening. If they could prove they were shocked and horrified and financially damaged by me, they could sue Stonemere again for emotional distress instead of being charged as accomplices who took hush money. I was the sacrificial lamb in their insurance fraud. The door to the bedroom opened. I jumped, slamming the laptop shut. It was Connor. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his eyes rimmed with red. He was holding a tablet in his hand, his knuckles white. He didn't look like the man who had tried to hand me a post-nuptial agreement an hour ago. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Cat," he said. His voice was hollow. "What?" I asked, my defenses still up. "Did you sign it? Did you sign the firewall?" He shook his head, a jerky, mechanical motion. "No, I didn't sign it." He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, far away from me. He placed the tablet on the duvet between us. "I started digging," he said. "Like you said, I wanted to know if my family was clean. I wanted to prove to you that the Whitfalls were just bystanders." He looked up at me, and his eyes were full of a terrifying vulnerability. "We aren't bystanders. Cat." I looked at the tablet. It was displaying a scanned page from a digitized annual report. Stonemere Fertility Pavilion, Annual Donor Gala, 1994. 1994, Connor said. "The year before we were born." He pointed to a name on the platinum donor list, the Whitfall Family Trust. "My grandfather," Connor whispered, "and my father. They didn't just donate. Cat, look at the designation." I leaned in. Next to the name, it said, "Capital Campaign for the Genetic Preservation Wing." "My family paid for the wing," Connor said, his voice trembling. "They paid for the freezers. They paid for the technology that stored the embryos. My dad was on the board of directors for 3 years in the 90s. I stared at him. The room seemed to spin. "Your dad?" I asked. "But Eleanor, does she know?" "She has to," Connor said. "She divorced him in 98. But she was there. She knew the people running that place. She knew the doctors." He ran a hand through his hair, gripping the roots. "That is why she has the files," he said. "She didn't get them from a friend in records. She got them from her own basement. She's been sitting on this for decades." I looked at my husband. He was devastated, but a cold, sharp question began to rise in my chest, unbidden and unwanted. "Connor," I said slowly, "if your family funded the clinic and your mother has the files." I stood up, backing away from the desk. "Did she bring me here to save me?" I asked. "Or did she bring me here to control the witness?" Connor looked up. "What?" "Think about it," I said, my voice rising. "My parents are small-time crooks. They took 75 grand to shut up. But your family built the place. If Stonemere goes down, if the fraud is exposed, the Whitfall name is on the building. The liability isn't thousands. Connor, it is millions." I pointed at the door. "She brought me to the Ainsworths. She brought me to the one family that has the money to bury Stonemere. Is she helping them sue the clinic, or is she trying to steer the lawsuit so it doesn't hit the Whitfall Trust?" Connor stood up. My mom hates my dad. She hates the trust. She wouldn't protect them. She would protect you, I said. You are the heir to that trust. Aren't you eventually? Connor went silent. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He started. I don't know. You don't know if you are the heir. I don't know what she is doing, he admitted. But Kat, I am here. I am telling you this. I found the donor list. I showed it to you. If I was trying to cover it up, I would have deleted it. He took a step toward me. I am terrified, he said. I think my entire life might be built on the same lie yours is. I think our families might be in this together. And I think we are the only two people in this house who don't know the full story. I looked at him. I wanted to collapse into his arms. I wanted to believe that we were a team again. Two refugees fleeing a burning building, but the data analyst in my brain wouldn't shut off. I looked at the tablet. I looked at the man. He had shown me the donor list. That was a point in his favor. But he had also brought me to this house, to this room, on his mother's orders. If we are going to survive this, I said, my voice steady, we have to stop trusting them, all of them, Eleanor included. Okay, Connor said. Okay, how do we do that? We stop being the children, I said, and we start being the prosecution. I turned the laptop back around so he could see the screen, the spreadsheet, the credit fraud, the email from my father. My parents are vulnerable, I said. They committed financial fraud against me. That is our lever. If we pull that lever, they flip on Stonemere. And if they flip on Stonemere, we find out who really pulled the strings. I looked Connor in the eye. But if that string leads back to your mother, I asked, are you ready to pull it, even if it destroys your inheritance, even if it destroys the firewall you wanted to build? Connor looked at the screen, then back at me. He took a deep breath. Burn it down, he said. Revenge is not a fire. It is a filing system. If I had learned anything from my 30 years as the daughter of Arthur and Evelyn Northvale, it was that emotion was a liability, but documentation was currency. They had tried to bankrupt me with a ledger. I was going to bury them with a paper trail. The morning after I discovered the credit fraud and the hush money email, the atmosphere in the Ainsworth guest cottage shifted. We stopped being a grieving family and a shocked couple. We became a war room. I sat at the head of the dining table. Eleanor sat to my right. Mr. Sterling, the Ainsworth's attorney, sat to my left. Connor was there too, pouring coffee, hovering on the periphery. He wanted to help, but he knew he had lost his voting rights in this committee. We have two vectors of attack, Sterling said, placing two stacks of paper on the table. Vector A is Stonemere. That is the long game, class action, medical malpractice, fraud. That takes years. He tapped the second stack. Vector B is the Northvales. That is immediate. I don't want to just sue them for money, I said, my voice steady. They have money. They will just write a check and tell themselves they paid me off to go away. I want to dismantle the narrative. Then we hit them on the extortion, Eleanor said. She was wearing her reading glasses, looking through the photos I had taken of the expenditure report. This ledger isn't just cruel, Katrina. It is a demand for payment based on a fraudulent premise. They knew you weren't their biological daughter 4 years ago. Every dollar they spent on you since then, and every dollar they are trying to claw back now, constitutes an attempt to profit from a person they knew they had no legal obligation to. And the credit line, I added. Northvale Hearth and Patio. They used my social security number to secure a loan for a business that didn't exist, then defaulted on it, then paid it off slowly to hide the tracks. That is federal identity theft. Sterling nodded. We can file criminal complaints, but if you want to hurt them, really hurt them, you need to destroy their reputation before the police even knock on the door. I looked at the ocean churning outside. I need the video. Connor looked up. The video of the party. The boy in the corner, I said. The neighbor's kid. He was filming. My father thought he was documenting his triumph. I need that footage. I can get it, Connor said. It was the first time he had spoken with conviction all morning. The kid's dad is a subcontractor I use for irrigation installs. I will call him. I will tell him we want it for a keepsake. Do it, I said. By noon, we had the file. Watching it was like performing surgery on myself without anesthesia. I watched myself walk into that silent room. I saw the foolish, hopeful smile on my face. I saw the way my mother looked at the floor. I heard my father's voice, dry and monotonous, reading the numbers. $348,722. It is perfect, I said, closing the laptop. It shows everything. The ambush, the premeditation, the cruelty. What do you want to do with it? Sterling asked. We can submit it as evidence. Evidence is for judges, I said. I want a jury of their peers. I contacted a producer at Channel 8 News. She was a woman I had met once at a charity gala, a journalist who specialized in consumer protection stories. I didn't pitch her a sob story about a family drama. I pitched her a story about a financial scam. Subject: fraud alert. Local family targeted by identity theft scheme disguised as estate planning. She called me back in 10 minutes. The interview aired that evening. I sat in a studio chair, wearing a simple black suit. I did not cry. I did not ask for sympathy. I looked directly into the camera lens, speaking to the thousands of people in Charlotte who knew Arthur and Evelyn Northvale as upstanding citizens. They didn't see a daughter, I told the reporter, my voice calm and low. They saw an asset, and when the asset stopped appreciating, they tried to liquidate it. They handed me a bill for my childhood. They tried to charge me interest on my own birthday cake. The reporter looked shocked. You mean they literally gave you an invoice? Yes, I said. They turned a human being into an invoice, and I'm speaking out because I know I am not the only one. Stonemere Fertility Pavilion created a mess, but my parents, the people who raised me, decided to profit from it. The reaction was instantaneous. Social media lit up. The clip of my father reading the dental costs went viral within the hour. The neighbors who had stood in that living room and clapped began to scrub their online profiles, terrified of being associated with the villains of the week. My parents reacted exactly as I predicted. They didn't apologize. They didn't hide. They counterattacked. 2 days later, a courier arrived at the Ainsworth estate with a heavy envelope addressed to me. It was a formal demand letter from a law firm I knew my father had used for years. Dear Ms. Northvale, we represent Arthur and Evelyn Northvale. In light of your recent defamatory statements and your departure from the family residence, our clients are accelerating their demand for repayment of outstanding debts. Attached is a finalized schedule of restitution. This includes the previously discussed sum of $348,000, plus legal fees, and a new charge for reputational damages estimated at $50,000. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in immediate litigation. I held the letter, feeling a cold smile touch my lips. They took the bait, I said to Connor. He was reading over my shoulder. They are insane. They are actually putting this in writing. They are arrogant, I corrected. They think because I am Katrina, the project manager who always followed the rules, I will be scared of a lawyer's letterhead. They don't realize that by sending this. They just proved the extortion. They were confirming that the ledger wasn't a birthday prank. It was a genuine financial demand. They were legally claiming that a parent could charge a child for raising them. No court in the country would uphold it. But the attempt itself was malicious. I can make a statement, Connor offered. I can go on the news. I can tell them that I saw it. I can tell them about the credit fraud. I looked at him. He was trying so hard to be the hero now. He wanted to stand in front of me and take the bullets. No, I said. Why not? He asked, hurt. I am your husband. Because this is my name, I said. For 30 years, I was Katrina Northvale, the good investment. Now I am Katrina Northvale, the bad debt. I have to be the one to close the account. Connor, if you step in, It becomes a husband-wife dispute. If I stand alone, it is justice. I turned to Sterling. It is time for the meeting. Are you sure? Sterling asked. It is high risk. If you lose your cool, if you say the wrong thing, you could give them ammunition. I won't lose my cool, I said. I have the data. We drafted the invitation. It was deceptively simple. I sent an email to my father. Dad, I received the demand letter. I cannot pay the full amount, but I'm willing to discuss a settlement plan to resolve this matter quietly. I have access to funds through a third party. I want to end this. Meet me at the Gilded Oak at 7 o'clock on Friday. Just the three of us. No lawyers. It was a trap. The Gilded Oak was a high-end restaurant, a place they loved because it made them feel important. It was public enough that they wouldn't make a scene, but private enough for a conversation. And no lawyers was a lie. Sterling wouldn't be at the table, but he would be at the bar, and he had arranged for a private investigator to be seated at the adjacent booth with a directional microphone. North Carolina was a one-party consent state. I could record whatever I wanted, but before I could send the email, Everett Ainsworth walked into the room. He looked older than he had yesterday. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he held a file. We found something else, he said. He laid the file on the table. It was labeled Rory Calder. Who is she? I asked. The woman carrying the Northvale jeans. Yes, Everett said. We located her in Ohio. She is 29. She works as a librarian. He paused, swallowing hard. She is sick. Katrina. I looked at the photo attached to the file. A woman with dark hair and soft eyes. She looked a little like my father around the mouth. She looked tired. She has an autoimmune disorder, Everett explained. It is rare. Her doctors have been trying to treat it for years, but they are working with the wrong genetic map. They think she is the biological daughter of the Calders. She isn't. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and she needs an accurate family history to find a match. The air left the room. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about my humiliation or the Ainsworth's grief. There was a real, living woman in Ohio who was dying because my parents, her biological parents, were hiding the truth to save their own skins. If we expose Stonemere, Sterling said quietly, we get the records unsealed. Rory gets her history. She gets a chance. But if we settle, Eleanor warned, if your parents manage to spin this narrative and bury the clinic under a quiet payout, the records stay sealed, and Rory stays sick. I looked at the photo of Rory Calder. She was the innocent bystander in this collision. She was the one who was supposed to have my life. She was the one my father should have been raising, investing in, and loving. Instead, she was sick in Ohio, and I was here, plotting revenge. I felt a new kind of anger. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of the birthday party. It was a cold, heavy responsibility. My parents don't care about her, I said. They took the hush money 4 years ago. They knew there was a mistake, and they didn't care to find out if their actual child was out there. They left her to rot. I looked at Connor. He was staring at Rory's picture, looking sick. He knew that his family's money had built the place that caused this. We have to get them to admit it, I said. On tape. At the restaurant. Admit what? Connor asked. The fraud. No, I said. We need them to admit they knew. We need them to admit they took the payment from Stonemere and agreed to suppress the truth. If we have that, we can force the clinic's hand. We can bypass the lawsuits and go straight to the medical board. We can get Rory her records. I hit send on the email to my father. The meeting was set. I stood up and walked to the window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman I barely recognized. She looked tired. She looked hard. She looked like someone who was about to sit down at a table with her abusers and smile while she slipped a knife between their ribs. I wasn't doing it for the Ainsworth's money. I wasn't even doing it for my own name anymore. I was doing it for Rory. I was doing it because I refused to let another person be erased by Arthur and Evelyn Northvale. I am ready, I said to the room. But as I looked at the dark water outside, I wondered if I really was. I was walking into a trap of my own making, and the only way out was to destroy the people I had called Mom and Dad for 30 years. I had to choose between being a loyal daughter and being a decent human being, and in the end, that wasn't really a choice at all. It was just another necessary expenditure. The Gilded Oak was the kind of restaurant where the menus were bound in leather and the silence was heavy enough to weigh on a scale. It was my parents' favorite place. It was a theater of respectability, the perfect stage for the performance I was about to deliver. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. I wore a soft beige sweater and no jewelry. I wanted to look diminished. I wanted to look like the daughter who had been broken by the weight of the debt they had placed on my shoulders. Arthur and Evelyn Northvale were already seated at a corner booth. My father was drinking a scotch. My mother was shredding a bread roll into tiny, nervous piles of crumbs. When I approached, my father didn't stand. He gestured to the empty chair across from him, as if he were granting me an audience. "You look tired." "Catriona," my mother said. It wasn't concern, it was an observation of a flaw. "It has been a hard week," I said, keeping my voice low. "I can't sleep. The numbers, the debt, it is all I think about." My father nodded, satisfied. He took a sip of his drink. "Reality is often a heavy burden after living in a fantasy for so long. We are glad you are finally taking this seriously." "I am," I lied. "But Dad, $350,000, I don't have that kind of liquidity. Even if I liquidate my retirement, I am short. I need to understand, where did the number come from? Is it really just the expenses?" "It is the cost of the error," he said sharply. "It is the cost of maintaining a non-performing asset." I leaned in, resting my elbows on the table. The hidden microphone taped to the underside of my purse was 3 feet away from him. "But you got money from the clinic," I whispered. "I know about the settlement. Dad, I know about the $75,000 from Stonemere 4 years ago." My mother froze. Her hand stopped shredding the bread. She looked at my father with wide, terrified eyes. My father didn't flinch. He was too arrogant for that. He smiled, a thin, cruel curving of his lips. "That was for our pain and suffering," he said smoothly. "That was a separate transaction. It has nothing to do with your debt to us." "But if you settled," I pressed, "you must have signed a non-disclosure agreement. If I pay you this money publicly, won't it trigger a breach of contract with Stonemere? Won't they come after you?" My father scoffed. "Let them come. We are not fools. Katrina, we didn't give them everything. We kept leverage." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. "What kind of leverage?" I asked, widening my eyes to look impressed. "You kept files." "We kept what we needed to ensure our security," he said, lowering his voice. "Originals, correspondence. We have proof that they didn't just make a mistake. They made a choice. We kept it in a safe deposit box, just in case they ever tried to renege on the payments. So do not worry about Stonemere. You worry about your checkbook." "Gotcha." I nodded submissively. "Okay, I understand. I don't want to be ruined." "Then pay us," my mother said, her voice suddenly hard. "And we will consider the matter closed." I stood up. I didn't touch my water. "I will have my lawyer draft the transfer." I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. As soon as I hit the cool night air of the parking lot, I pulled out my phone. "Did you get it?" I asked. Clear as a bell. Sterling's voice came through the earpiece. "Admitted to retaining leverage. Admitted to the prior settlement. We have them on extortion and breach of contract. And Katrina, we have probable cause to subpoena that safe deposit box." I got into my car, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. Back at the Ainsworth estate, the mood was electric. While I had been playing the role of the prodigal daughter, Jay, the forensic analyst, had been dissecting the digital corpse of my life. He was set up in the library, 3 monitors glowing with lines of code. "The DNA report from the party," Jay said as soon as I walked in. "The one your dad waved around, it is a Frankenstein document." "Fake?" I asked. "Modified," Jay corrected. "The core data, the 0% match, is real. That part is medically accurate, but the metadata shows the file was compiled from 2 different sources. The background template is new, but the genetic raw data. He pointed to a string of numbers on the screen. This data was generated 13 years ago. I stared at him. 13. You mean 4? They found out 4 years ago. No, Jay said. The timestamp on the original sequencing is from 2013. You were what, 17? I did the math. 2013. I was a junior in high school. I had an appendectomy, I whispered. Emergency surgery. My appendix burst. They did a full blood panel before the surgery. And that is when they found out, Connor said from the doorway. He looked pale. Your blood type probably didn't match theirs. It raised a red flag. Your dad must have ordered a private paternity test right then. I sank into a chair. 13 years. They had known for 13 years. They had sent me to prom, watched me graduate valedictorian, attended my college ceremony, and walked me down the aisle at my wedding, all while knowing I was a stranger. They hadn't just been managing an asset. They had been playing a long con for over a decade. The 4-year mark wasn't when they found out. It was just when they figured out how to monetize it with Stonemere. They let me believe. I couldn't finish the sentence. The level of sociopathy required to fake parenthood for 13 years was beyond my comprehension. There is more, Connor said. He walked over and placed a stack of printed emails on the desk. I have been digging into the Stonemere employee archives. My mom, she gave me access to the Whitfall Trust server. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I found an internal memo from 2010, Connor said. It was sent to the board of directors. Subject anomaly in cryogenic log B. He handed me the paper. To the board, I am writing to formally document a discrepancy in the embryo transfer logs from 1995. Several entries appear to have been retroactively altered. The physical inventory does not match the digital record. I recommend an immediate external audit. It was signed J. Moreland, Senior Coordinator. J. Moreland, I read. Who is she? She was a mid-level administrator, Connor said. 2 weeks after she sent this memo. She was fired for insubordination. The audit never happened. The memo was buried. She tried to warn them, I said. 16 years ago, and they silenced her. Kat, Connor said, his voice tight. Look at the video. He opened the laptop where we had saved the footage of my birthday party. The footage from the neighbor's kid. He scrubbed the timeline to the very beginning. Before I walked in, when the guests were just standing around waiting, he zoomed in on the far corner of the kitchen, near the pantry door, standing in the shadows, half hidden by a tall potted plant, was a woman. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy coat. Despite the warm heating, she wasn't holding a drink. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was watching my parents with a look of pure, concentrated loathing. That is her, Connor said. That is Jessa Moreland. I found her current photo on a LinkedIn profile. She's older now, but that is her. I stared at the grainy image, the whistleblower. The woman who had tried to stop the machine was standing in my parents' kitchen while they executed me. Why was she there? I asked. Did they invite her? No way, Connor said. Look at her body language. She is crashing. She is a witness. She knew they were going to do something. She must have been tracking them. If she has the original logs, I said, my mind racing. If she has the proof that Stonemere altered the records back in '95 that proves it wasn't a mistake, it proves it was a crime. The phone rang. It was Sterling. Turn on the television, he said. Channel 4, your parents are on the offensive. We clicked on the TV in the corner. There they were, Arthur and Evelyn Northvale, standing on the steps of the Briar Glen Community Church. My mother was wiping a tear from her eye. My father had his arm around her, looking stoic and noble. A banner behind them read, Faith and Forgiveness Fundraiser. We are heartbroken, my father was telling the cameras. To have our private pain twisted by the media, it is a test of faith. We loved Katrina. We tried to help her, but the deception finding out she had deceived us about her origins. I choked on a laugh. Deceived them, I was an embryo. We are holding this gathering tonight, my father continued, to raise money for families affected by adoption fraud. We want to turn this tragedy into a blessing. They are laundering their reputation, Eleanor said. Walking into the room, she looked furious. They are using the church to hide behind. If they pull this off, if they get the community to see them as victims, no jury in this town will convict them of extortion. I stood up. I looked at the screen, at the fake tears on my mother's face. They want a public spectacle, I said. Let's give them one. What are you going to do? Connor asked. I am going to the church, I said, and I am not going alone. 2 hours later, the Briar Glen Community Church Hall was packed. It was a sea of sympathetic faces, neighbors who had bought the North Vale's lie. My parents were on stage, accepting checks, shaking hands. I walked in through the main double doors. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked down the center aisle. Flanking me were 2 process servers in plain clothes. Behind me was a cameraman I had hired not for news, but for legal documentation. The room went quiet. The murmurs started. Is that her? Is that the daughter? My father saw me. His smile faltered. He stepped to the microphone. Catriona, we didn't expect you. Have you come to pray with us? He was good. He was trying to frame me as the prodigal seeking forgiveness. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I looked at him. I looked at the crowd, the same crowd that had clapped when I was evicted from my life. I didn't come to pray. Arthur, I said. My voice was clear. Carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. I came to answer your demand letter. I nodded to the process server on my right. He stepped forward, walked up the stairs, and handed my father a thick stack of documents. Arthur Northvale, the server said loudly. You are served. Civil suit for extortion, identity theft, and fraud. He turned to my mother and handed her a matching stack. Evelyn Northvale, you are served. My mother recoiled, as if the papers were burning. This is a house of God, she shrieked, and you are using it to launder a crime, I said. I turned to the audience. Those people, I said, pointing to the stage, admitted on tape last night that they have known for 13 years that I was not their daughter. They admitted they took $75,000 from Stonemere Fertility Pavilion to hide that truth from me. And they admitted that the debt they are claiming I owe is a fabrication to cover their own financial crimes. A gasp went through the room. Lies, my father shouted, his face turning purple. She is unstable. Get her out of here. It is not a lie, I said, pulling a flash drive from my pocket and holding it up. It is a recording, and it is already with the district attorney. I looked at the neighbors. You clapped when they threw me out, I said. You watched them hand me a bill for my childhood. Ask yourselves, who charges a child for being born? I dropped the flash drive on the communion table in front of the stage. It made a sharp clack. Happy fundraising, I said. I turned and walked out. The silence behind me was heavy. But this time, it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of a magic trick being revealed. When I got back to the car, my phone buzzed. It was a number with an Ohio area code. Hello? I answered, my heart still racing. Is this Catriona? The voice was weak, breathless, but edged with a sharp, burning anger. Yes, I said. Is this Rory? I saw the news, the woman said. The clip of your father reading the dental bill. A friend sent it to me. Rory Calder paused, and I could hear the ragged sound of her breathing. My parents, she said. The people who raised me, they were good. They were kind. My dad died of cancer 2 years ago. My mom is in a home now with dementia. I am sorry, I said softly. Don't be, Rory said. But here's the thing. My mom, in her lucid moments, she used to talk about the clinic. She said they guaranteed a boy. They paid extra for sex selection. Stonemere promised them a son. My grip on the phone tightened. A son? Yes, Rory said. But they got me. And when they complained, the The clinic told them to be grateful for a healthy child and refunded half their money. It wasn't an accident. Katrina, it was inventory management. They ran out of male embryos for the Calders, so they grabbed the next one on the shelf. Yours? And the Northvale embryo? I asked. The one that was supposed to be me. That is what I am telling you, Rory said. I am not the Northvale baby. I froze. What? I have type O negative blood, Rory said. Your parents, Arthur and Evelyn, I looked up their medical records from the leak you mentioned. They are both type A positive. They couldn't produce an O negative child. The world tilted. If you aren't their child, I whispered. And I am not their child, then where is the Northvale baby? I don't know, Rory said, but I know this. Stonemere didn't just swap two babies. They shuffled the whole deck, and there is someone else out there, someone who doesn't know they are part of this. I hung up the phone. I looked at Connor, who was driving us away from the church. Rory isn't theirs, I said numbly. What? Connor swerved slightly. She isn't the Northvale child. The chain is longer than we thought. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights. We had served the papers. We had humiliated my parents. But the victory felt hollow. Because somewhere, hidden in the paper trail of the Whitfall Trust and the Stonemere archives, was the answer to a question I hadn't thought to ask. Who was actually in charge of the shuffle? And then I remembered the whistleblower, Jessa Moreland, standing in the corner, watching. Connor, I said, we need to find Jessa Moreland, tonight. Why? Because she wasn't watching my parents at the party, I said. A cold realization washing over me. She was watching you. Connor went rigid. Me? Why me? Because, I said, turning to look at him, you are the only Whitfall in the room. And in the darkness of the car, I saw my husband's hand tighten on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead, into the dark, and for the first time, I wondered if he was driving me toward the truth, or away from it. The deposition room at the courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a sterile, windowless box designed to strip away emotion and leave only the raw, jagged edges of the truth. My parents, Arthur and Evelyn Northvale, sat on one side of the long mahogany table. They looked smaller than I remembered, without the backdrop of their curated living room or the stage of the community church. They were just two elderly people caught in a lie that had grown too big for them to carry. Mr. Sterling sat beside me. On the other side of the room, the legal team for Stonemere Fertility Pavilion looked expensive and bored, checking their watches as if this dismantling of human lives was merely a scheduling conflict. But the person who changed the temperature in the room was not a lawyer. It was the woman who walked in through the back door, accompanied by a federal marshal. She was older than she had appeared in the grainy video from my birthday party. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a sensible wool coat. She didn't look at my parents. She didn't look at the Stonemere lawyers. She looked straight at me. State your name for the record, the court reporter said. Jessa Moreland, she said. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping on pavement. Former senior coordinator of embryology at Stonemere Fertility Pavilion. My father shifted in his seat. This is irrelevant, his lawyer interrupted. Ms. Moreland was terminated for cause 16 years ago. She is a disgruntled employee. I was terminated because I found the logs, Jessa said, cutting him off. She reached into her bag and pulled out a binder. It wasn't digital. It was paper yellowed. Dot matrix printer paper. The kind with the perforated edges still attached. And I didn't come here to testify about my employment. I came to testify about the inventory. She slid the binder across the table. 1995 was a profitable year, Jessa said, looking at the Stonemere attorneys. We were overbooked. We had promised 50 couples a guaranteed conception within the fiscal year. We didn't have the inventory. The donors backed out. The biological yield was low. She pointed a shaking finger at the ledger. Catriona wasn't an accident, Jessa said. She wasn't a mix-up. She was a substitution. The room went dead silent. The Northvales paid for a premium package, Jessa continued. They wanted specific traits: high intelligence, athleticism, no history of mental illness, but their biological material wasn't viable. We knew it. The doctors knew it, but instead of refunding the $60,000, the director ordered a pull from the general storage. She looked at me, and her eyes softened with a terrible pity. You were the Ainsworth embryo, she said. You were viable, you were healthy, and you were available. They slapped a new label on the Petri dish because they had a quarterly revenue target to hit. It was inventory management. You were a product moved from shelf A to shelf B to close a deal. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wasn't just unloved. I was a fraudulent transaction. I was a placeholder used to balance the books of a fertility clinic. And the Northvales? I asked, my voice trembling. When did they know? They suspected early, Jessa said, but they confirmed it 13 years ago, and when Stonemere found out that the Northvales knew, the clinic paid them $75,000. Hush money, she turned to my father. But you got greedy. Arthur, she said. You took the money, but you kept the child. And then, when the Ainsworths started sniffing around last year, you realized you were about to be exposed. So you decided to monetize the exit strategy. That is a lie, my father shouted. Standing up. We were victims. We raised her. You billed her, Jessa snapped, slamming her hand on the table. I was there, Arthur. I was at the party. I stood in your kitchen and watched you hand that girl a ledger. I saw you itemize her dental work. I recorded it. She looked at the judge, or rather, the mediator presiding over the deposition. I needed them to do it, Jessa confessed. I tracked the Northvales for months. I knew they were planning a public humiliation. I couldn't stop it. And for that, Katrina, I am sorry. But I needed them to commit an overt act of extortion in front of witnesses. That was the only way to pierce the non-disclosure agreement they signed with Stonemere. I needed them to break the contract so I could bring these logs into the light. I looked at Jessa. She hadn't been a passive observer. She had been a sniper waiting for the target to show himself. She had let me walk into that ambush so she could win the war. It was cruel. But looking at the terror on the Stonemere lawyers' faces, I knew it was necessary. The fallout was immediate. The unaltered logs Jessa provided were a death sentence for Stonemere's reputation. The lawyers asked for a recess. Within an hour, they returned with a settlement offer that made the air in the room feel heavy with gold. They accepted full liability, they agreed to independent federal oversight, and crucially, they agreed to fund a lifetime medical trust for every child affected by the inventory management of the 90s. That meant Rory Calder, the woman dying in Ohio because she had the wrong medical history, would get her treatment. She would get her bone marrow transplant. She would live. But the money didn't fix the hole in the room where my parents used to be. Arthur and Evelyn sat frozen. The settlement protected Stonemere from a trial. But it didn't protect the Northvales. Mr. Sterling stood up and picked up the expenditure report, the dossier my father had given me. Mr. Northvale, Sterling said, this document represents a demand for $348,000. You claimed this was a debt owed by Katrina. You sent a legal demand letter threatening litigation if she did not pay. It was symbolic, my father stammered. It was extortion, Sterling corrected. You attempted to coerce money from a person you knew was not your biological child, using the threat of public humiliation and legal harassment. And you did this while concealing the fact that you had already accepted a $75,000 settlement for the same issue. Sterling placed a second document on the table. And the credit line for Northvale Hearth and Patio, Sterling added. Identity theft, federal fraud. We have the handwriting analysis on the loan application. It matches Evelyn Northvale's signature. My mother put her head in her hands and began to weep. It wasn't the polite, single-tear weeping of the church fundraiser. It was the ugly, gasping sob of a woman who realizes the country club will never let her back in. I stood up. I walked over to where they sat. I am not going to sue you for the money, I said quietly. They looked up, hope flashing in their eyes. I don't want your money, I said. I don't want a single dime that has touched your hands, but I'm not going to let you walk away. I placed a folder on the table. This is a formal severance of ties, I said. It is a restraining order. It is a cease and desist, and it is a confession. A confession, my father asked. Yours, I said. You are going to sign a statement admitting to the extortion and the identity theft. If you sign it, I will ask the district attorney to recommend probation instead of prison time. If you don't sign it, I will testify at your trial, and I will play the video of my birthday party for the jury every single day until they lock you up. My father looked at the paper. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a minute, defeated nod. He picked up the pen. His hand shook. The arrogance was gone. He wasn't the CEO of the family anymore. He was just a bankrupt old man signing a surrender treaty. When we walked out of the courthouse, the sun was blinding. Connor was waiting for me by the steps. He wasn't celebrating. He looked somber. Did they sign? He asked. Yes, I said. It is over. Kat, he said, stopping me before I could reach the car. We need to talk. About us, I braced myself. I know. The trust. The Whitfall money. It wasn't just the money, Connor said. He looked at his shoes, then forced himself to look at me. I knew my family was dirty. Kat, I didn't know the specifics of Stonemere, but I knew the Whitfall Trust was built on things that didn't stand up to sunlight. I spent my whole life trying to be different. That is why I became a landscaper. That is why I drive a truck. I wanted to be clean. He took a step closer. When I met you, he said, his voice cracking, you were so structured. You had this perfectly organized life that you had built yourself. You didn't come from old money. You didn't have secrets. You were just Katrina. And I thought if I marry her, I can escape. I can be part of her clean, honest life. He wiped his face. I didn't tell you about my suspicions because I was terrified that if you knew where I came from, really knew you would look at me the way you look at them now. I didn't want to lose the only real thing I had. I looked at my husband. I saw the fear in him. He hadn't been malicious. He had been a coward. He had used me as a life raft to escape his own family's toxicity, not realizing I was drowning in my own. You should have told me, I said. I know, he said, and I know I can't fix it, but I did one thing. He pulled a paper out of his pocket. It wasn't a post-nuptial agreement. I resigned from the trust, he said. I signed the papers this morning. I gave up my seat on the board, and I donated my entire inheritance interest to the medical fund for the Stonemere victims. Every cent. I stared at him. Connor, that is millions. I don't care, he said. I can fix faucets. I can lay sod. I can work. I want to be the guy you thought I was, the guy who fixes the leak. I looked at the paper. It was a receipt of donation. He had bankrupted himself to buy back his integrity. I reached out and took his hand. It felt rough, calloused, and warm. Take me home, I said. Not the Ainsworth estate, our home. 3 months later, my new apartment in downtown Charlotte was small. It didn't have a garage full of hoarded boxes or a guest cottage with an ocean view. It had exposed brick walls and a window that looked out over the city lights. It was my 31st birthday. There were no guests. There was no surprise waiting in the dark. It was just me and Connor. We sat on the floor, eating takeout pizza from a box. On the coffee table sat a bottle of wine. It wasn't an expensive vintage from the Whitfall cellar. It wasn't a bottle from the Ainsworth collection. It was a $19 Cabernet. The exact same brand I had carried into my parents' house a year ago. I picked it up. The label was pristine. I had bought it myself. Are you going to open it? Connor asked. Yes, I said. I uncorked the bottle. The pop was soft, not like a gunshot, but like a sigh of relief. I poured 2 glasses. I thought about Arthur and Evelyn, living in a downsized condo, stripped of their reputation, avoided by their neighbors. I thought about the Ainsworths, who were slowly learning to know me as Katrina, not as a replacement for Sloane. I thought about Rory in Ohio, recovering from her surgery, finally holding a family tree that had real roots. I wasn't a project anymore. I wasn't an asset. I wasn't a liability. I raised the glass. To the audit, I said. Connor clinked his glass against mine. To the balance sheet. I took a sip. It tasted like cheap grapes and oak chips. It tasted perfect. I had lost a family I never really had. I had gained a history I never knew existed. And for the first time in 31 years, when I looked at the ledger of my life, I didn't owe anyone a single damn thing. Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of Katrina's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a quiet room like Katrina's new apartment, or are you on the go? Let me know in the comments below so we can share this moment together. If you enjoyed this story of justice and reclaiming one's life, please subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can bring more of these stories to light for everyone who needs to hear them. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.